What's up guys, it's Pliskin here, and you'll notice on this channel I like to talk a lot about guns. Specifically guns in games, and hypothetical situations, rating them in different ways, but I never really discussed why. Well, I think guns have taken kind of a very important role in games as they kind of serve as our means of expression. They serve as player agency. So I figured to kind of celebrate this and to get this off my chest so I can start making gun videos on this channel. I talk about the different ways that certain games can implement guns in there and how this really affects the overall experience. But before I can do this, I need to first define the different methods by which developers can put guns into their game, how they all work. Now, I'm not a developer, so I'm sure there's probably actual terms for this out there, but I'm just going to introduce you to the ideas and the terms that I use to wrap my head around all this. So without further ado, let's go. Now, the way I see it, I've kind of identified through my years of just, playing games, that there are three different methods by which one can implement guns or implement this form of agency into said games. The first means that a developer can do this we'll call level up guns. Now, you'll see this a lot in RPGs, for example, Fallout New Vegas, where you'll have a gun that fulfills a certain role, and then you'll have a gun that's pretty much just like it. It's just a better version. It just does more damage. It has more range. Maybe it'll have a different quirk, but it's pretty much that same gun for that same purpose. And because of that, I'll call this level up because, you go from one that's good to one that's better, but it's pretty much all the same reason for using it. The second method, I don't really have a name for it, and I'll explain why later. For now, it's just going to be a mesh of the two other methods I have, where there's different kinds of guns that serve similar purposes, but there's enough of a difference between them to make them feel distinct from one another, to give each one of them a certain personality. But it's still not a completely different gun, it's still for the same purpose. Lastly, we have what I'm going to call the single purpose method. Now, this is where each gun has its own individual identity and its own individual purpose. No two guns share the similar traits or are to be used in the same way. A good example of this would be Halo Combat Evolved. So now, this being said, what are the differences between these two different methods, and how do they change the games that they're placed in? Alright, let's start with the level up style of guns, and as I said before, I'm going to be using Fallout New Vegas because I've been looking for any excuse to have a video with Fallout New Vegas in it. Now, this game here, the way it handles agency and progression through guns specifically is by making you, over time, feel more powerful with the more you accomplish. For example, think about how you feel when you're playing through the game and you first pick up the service rifle and you start mowing down enemies. You have a 5.56 rifle that you can use for mid to close range, just something reliable, something that kind of works for a variety of situations. When you pick it up initially, you feel powerful, but you don't feel overpowered. You still feel like there's enemies out there that can pose a serious threat to you.
Then as you keep playing through New Vegas, eventually you come across the Marksman Carbine, which is pretty much the service rifle except now it has a scope on it. Now you have more options to go from longer ranges, you feel more powerful. The gun looks cooler. It gives you this sense of progression because you feel like, oh, I've been adventuring, now I've earned this cool weapon. Now, while you do get a sense of accomplishment from this level up system, you get the issue of having bland enemies. You see, because you have weapons that carry the same role and work in pretty much every situation despite what they're really designed for. Of course, there's certain exceptions like the sniper rifle or the early game lever action shotgun. For the most part, because you have such a variety of guns that fulfill so many roles all at the same time, you can't really do much with your enemies. Now, of course, in New Vegas they come in different shapes. For example, a raider looks very different from a ghoul. However, ghouls will always charge you. Some raiders will always charge you. And the alternative to that is having an enemy shoot at you. So you have your chargers and you have your shooters. This doesn't really add too much depth to the actual combat. Now, New Vegas gets around this by being really good in the sense that it adds context to what you're doing, and it does that very well, so it gets away with this. But it does feel a bit shallow at times when you're coming across the same enemy encounters over and over again. Now, New Vegas has a whole ton of other systems that prop it up and help get past the combat, but it doesn't change the fact that there are tons of mods to make the combat more interesting. And I think more so than mods or not enough detail being put into it, the biggest issue with the combat is that the guns don't they don't complement a stronger form of combat. So yes, while you go through the world and you find better versions of the same gun, you start feeling stronger, therefore you start feeling a sense of progression, but you don't get the same depth as you do in some of the other methods that I'm going to be going over today. So in summary, level up weapon systems are great because they give you a feeling of accomplishment as you get these newer guns. However, they carry the cons of being a bit shallow and not really providing deep or complicated combat systems. They do work for multiplayer settings, as you play the game more, the game rewards you for playing it, and you feel better because you get these better guns. So in a multiplayer setting, say for example like Call of Duty, it's great, but for single player experiences, it does carry these negatives.
Finally, a reason to talk about Halo. Okay, let's talk about single purpose guns. As I stated before, in this, or for it to qualify as single purpose, each gun has to have its own sense of identity, and the player will develop a sense of mastery and progression by familiarizing oneself with the functions of each one of these different guns that serve more so like mechanics. So your sense of progression doesn't come with, oh, okay, this gun looks cooler or it's doing more damage. Your sense of progression comes with, I know what this is, I know exactly how to use it.
For example, a new player to Halo Combat Evolved would think the plasma pistol is useless because of its low damage. However, an experienced player on higher difficulties will start to realize that this gun is fantastic for melting down shields or anything mechanical. So a skilled player will eventually learn the specific use for this gun and be able to work with it from that point there. Now, going forward, the shotgun, on the other hand, is the complete opposite of the plasma pistol. It's great for murking enemies up at close range and doing crazy damage, hell, even at mid-range. This is just a reliable gun that you can mow down enemies that are charging at you quite easily. Now, here you could see me employing both different methods. Using grenades to disarray the enemies on the floor, using that plasma pistol to take out the mechanical enemies above, the sentries, and then once they're all taken care of, you use the plasma pistol, you murk those shields, you mow your enemies down with the shotgun, and you keep on going. So is the dance of Halo. Now, touching on that point from earlier when I was talking about New Vegas, since Combat Evolved has weapons that are unique and fulfill certain purposes, the enemies can reflect said purposes of these guns. So they complement each other and can provide for a more grounded and demanding experience on behalf of the player. Let me give a couple examples of this. When coming across grunts, it's sometimes good to just pin them from far away with a DMR type weapon. They're weak, so if you're up close and there's only one, just bunt them, don't waste any ammo. If they're coming at you in swarms, use grenades or automatic weapons like the Needler or the assault rifle to thin out their numbers and lower the threat. Jackals are a bit more finicking as they have an advantage in head-on combat with their shields, so it's better to hit them from behind, throw grenades to surpass that shield. But whatever you do, you don't want to charge them that front because they can hit you and you can't hit them. Now, elites act as your equals in this game, so you really have to vary your strategy. Using the DMR pistol is usually a good alternative since although it was intended to be a sidearm, it works best as a main arm. Power weapons to just negate the encounter altogether is also recommended, because most of the time, these guys will rush you. They will be defensive. It's very hard to predict what an elite's going to do. So having a power weapon hitting them from behind when they don't see you and using stealth, using the pistol to eat away their shields and then just put them down, using the plasma pistol and shotgun combo that I showed you before is great. Or sometimes when you get the even harder elites, it's better to get the strongest power weapon, the rocket launcher, and just negate an entire experience with a golden elite. Because golden elites, you can't win in head-on combat. They surpass you. So because the player is weaker in the face of certain enemies, they need to understand power weapons and the roles they play in order to survive. So in short, single-purpose weapon-type games provide an in-depth experience in which the player needs to understand the certain enemies they're going to come across and the weapons they can go up against those enemies with. They need to understand how combinations of different weapons work, they need to understand which enemies get affected by which weapons differently, and they need to prepare themselves for each encounter that they come across. This provides that much-needed depth that wasn't present in the level-up system of games. One could argue that in a multiplayer setting, this kind of shows its faults, because if one person just manages to get the power weapon before anyone else, they can dominate the match. One could argue that whoever has just been playing the longest does more damage in, for example, a level up system. Everything comes with its flaws. It's up to your subjective opinion. I believe for a single player experience, this works. I believe for a multiplayer experience, this works better than level up, but if you think otherwise, I'm not going to put you up on a pedestal for it, I'm not going to knock you down for it. Now this brings us to the last means of implementing weapons or player agency into one of these kinds of games, and we're going to call it hybrid, because I feel like it takes features from both level up and single purpose gun settings. Now I'm going to use The Last of Us for this because it really perfectly encapsulates this hybrid nature. Originally I was going to use this as my example of a single purpose gun game, but then I started thinking, for every gun in this game, it has at least one counterpart that can be used in the same scenario. A good example of this would be the M16 you get at the end of the game and the Colt Defender 9mm you get at the beginning of the game. Now, both these guns are distinct enough from each other to earn their right as different guns, but they're both used in the same setting for the same purpose. They're both a mid-range weapon you use for pelting out weak rounds at a high fire rate, to either suppress your enemy to stun them to attack them, or to just murk through a ton of your ammo and put them down. And this is why the game is a hybrid, because no one's going to say the M16 and the Colt Defender are the same gun. One's a fully automatic assault rifle, one's a small little concealable pistol. So it carries around that benefit of level up games where you can include all these different guns that you can reward the player at later times where they can, feel great because, oh, now I have a cooler gun, I earned this, I got this far, so I deserve to be this powerful. But at the same time, it still allows for a certain level of depth in the sense that your guns still fulfill certain purposes. For example, your revolver is always going to be your trusty, powerful mid-range weapon. Your sniper rifle is always going to be the best choice when going up against ranged opponents because you don't have to get close enough for them to pose a threat. Your shotgun and flamethrower are always going to be your best options for when clickers, infected, bloaters start charging you. So you have different enemies that reflect different tactics, and your weapons can still do this while you still have a variety in your guns. So in a sense, it's the best of both worlds. While I feel The Last of Us showcases a lot of the good about hybrid games, I feel another game that is a hybrid that showcases the negatives of this implementation would be Halo Reach. Now let me make it very clear, I love Halo Reach and I am not trashing this game. However, I think by Halo going in a direction where it takes on a more hybrid approach, it loses some of that purity and complex nature that Combat Evolved carried with it. Take, for example, the different DMR variants in the game. You have your pistol, you have your actual DMR, and then you have the needle rifle. All these guns do the same thing, it's just that the pistol does it the worst, the DMR does it okay enough, and the needle rifle does it the best. So if you have 3 of them in a room and you know the game very well, you're going to try to pick up the needle rifle, right? The only reason you wouldn't use it is because the campaign makes ammo for it limited. However, it kills enemies faster and it's the more reliable and accurate gun. So you can see here there's an issue not necessarily with the combat system, but it's a bit redundant.
And again, I don't feel like this is ruining Halo Reach. I'm really nitpicking here, because the combat is still solid. You still have that chess-like nature where certain weapons work better on different enemies. It's just this redundance, this gun doesn't need to be here. As a kid, I was just like, ooh, more guns. But now that I'm older, it just kind of feels a little cheap when I have the best option and I don't have access to it simply because it's supposed to be a quasi-power weapon. In short, hybrid type games are cool because you get a nice selection of weapons there. For multiplayer, you kind of have that best of both worlds because you still have guns that fulfill a certain purpose, so it adds layer when you're playing against people, and you kind of mitigate the whole issue with whoever gets the power weapon first, since you have quasi power weapons, but at the same time, one can just argue that makes it worse. Um, but they offer that variety while still not taking away from the purity that comes from single purpose gun type games. All in all, hybrids, I like them. It's hard for me to call them the best. I'm a little bit biased. I prefer the single purpose gun games, but it seems to be the most sensible way to go around it if you want to keep a lot of guns in your game, but then have your gameplay still be interesting. Still be different from just having, shooting gallery here. Like Bioshock Infinite had a big problem. In the sense that all the enemies did the same thing because all your guns did the same thing, even though that was technically a hybrid type game, just not a good one. Anyways, I don't want to get too off topic. The point is, hybrid seems like the best of both worlds, but it also carries the problems that comes with both level up systems and single purpose guns. Well guys, I hope me pointing out these 3 different types of games has furthered your understanding of the games that you love, the games that you play. I hope you can take these things that I showed today and apply them for when you experience these games again. It'll help you experience them in a whole new light. Anyways, this has been Pliskin. I hope you guys enjoyed. Over and out.